professor in the sociology department. I teach introduction to sociology, sociology of law to seniors, and sociology of international law, and also I just started teaching perspectives on women's health globally. So kind of bringing together my interests in law and health. So the project I'm working on this semester is a comparative analysis of women's reproductive politics in Nicaragua, Peru, and Uruguay. And these three countries are very interesting because they're very different. So they're all Latin American countries, and they have some similarities in terms of like Spanish colonization and importance of the Catholic Church and so forth. But Uruguay has the most liberal abortion policy in Latin America. Nicaragua has the most conservative type of abortion policy that you can have. They don't have, so they criminalize abortion under all circumstances, even if a pregnant woman's life is in danger. So that's unusual in the world. And then Peru is somewhere in the middle, kind of at a standoff. They do have an exception to save the life and health of a pregnant woman, but it's not. It's never been expanded, and it's not very clear, sort of like when that should happen. Anyway, so the three countries are very different, and my goal this semester is to write up the material that we found with respect to all three countries to kind of understand why those differences are happening. And this comes out of an older project of mine that was published in the American Journal of Sociology that looked at abortion politics globally. And what's interesting is abortion politics are unusual in that there's no global consensus. So you see a lot of policy spreading around the world, like, for example, of course, allowing women to vote would be one example. I mean, every country allows women to vote now. It would be really unusual to not allow that. Countries tend to imitate themselves, but in certain areas they don't, and abortion is definitely one of those areas where local things seem to matter more. And this earlier paper found that the things that matter are what you might expect, women's representation in the legislature, but also the number of doctors and how medicalized the society is. So if a society is more medicalized, it tends to have more liberal abortion politics. So that was somewhat of a surprise to us. We didn't necessarily expect to see that. We thought that global women's movements and ties to global women's movements was going to be the explanatory factor. But in fact, that wasn't very much the case. And the Catholic Church was less of a factor than we thought it was going to be. So it seems important to bring it down to the countries and try to understand this within the context of particular countries. So that's what motivated this study. I think that's a really interesting question. So the issue of how communities and the organization of communities affects women's reproductive policies differently, I think is a really important question globally and including in the United States. You see a lot of differences across states in the U.S. New York is very different from Oklahoma in terms of abortion, and what explains that. So some of the factors that we're seeing in other countries probably also explain that. Another way in which this work connects to the United States is that so much of the influence that's happening even outside the United States is actually coming from the U.S. government or from groups within the United States. So for example, the Agency for International Development in the 1990s was really big in promoting family planning in Peru. But a few years later, you have a conservative fundamentalist group, Human Life International, that's been very active in terms of restricting access to certain kinds of birth control, and definitely interested in restricting access to abortion. Now, those things aren't exactly opposite to one another, but both of them have had big influence in Peru. So Americans have a huge global influence, and it's not just a single influence, it's a lot of different. The third thing I would say is that the medicalization factor is it seems really unique, as I said before. I don't think that really drives reproductive politics in the United States in the way that it does in other countries, and so that's one of the things that's going to be interesting to understand about when this project is all done. Well, the issue of abortion is a really interdisciplinary issue, as you can imagine. Of course, you have religious and theological perspectives, you have philosophical perspectives, you have medical perspectives, political perspectives, feminist perspectives, and it's, you're really missing out if you're not trying to capture all of those different ways of thinking about the issue. I think it's an issue where it's especially important because there's such a lack of communication across groups with respect to reproductive health in general and abortion in particular, that I think understanding the different disciplinary perspectives is really important for understanding the different views that people have. And so the IAS has been really great that way in terms of chatting with people about this issue. So you talk to people who are like studying literature or studying rights in other countries, but not necessarily women's rights, and studying historical phenomena, and it all kind of comes together to really round out the picture of what's happening in terms of these social processes and these human relationships. So being at the IAS has also been really helpful because I'm very much engaged in service at the university and teaching at the university, and it's been really helpful to have a semester away from other responsibilities to be able to focus on this particular research project, and just even having this nice office that's away from all of my colleagues over on the West Bank has been really great. I can really hunker down, spend focused time reading and writing and communicating with people, and so that's been just really great for kind of like stewing in the project and really trying to figure out what directions I want to